Welcome everyone to the Alumni webinar, The Journey of Caregiving, with Kathleen Griffin from the class of 1988 and Matthew Pimental from Merrill, Lynch. I'm Maura Sweeney, the Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar offered exclusively for the Holy Cross community. We'll be together for about an hour today. After the formal presentation, Kathleen and Matt will take questions from you for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation by checking out the Q&A function located on the webinar control panel. And you're welcome to submit thoughts in the chat if you have other comments that you want to contribute to the conversation. This presentation is recorded and will be made available to all participants in a few days. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers. Kathy Griffin is a member of the class of 1988 and is a certified financial planner and financial advisor at Merrill Lynch. She's had a couple of career changes over the years, including being a benefits consultant and a stay-at-home mother of 4 daughters, and brings the breadth of her personal and professional experience to her financial planning work with clients every day. And Matthew Pimental is a private wealth advisor and resident director at Merrill Lynch, the father of 2 beautiful children, and the caregiver of his 73-year-old father. I'm really excited to bring Kathy and Matt here to speak with all of us today. In our prep conversations, we talked about our own experiences with caregiving and found that each of our circumstances have been very, very different. And I'm sure that will be the case for many of you along your journey of caregiving. And throughout this conversation, we've chosen to share a little bit about our stories to see if some of what we've gone through might resonate with you, and if our tips might be useful for you as you explore this or as you're in this space. So for me, I experienced caregiving when my grandparents moved into my house. I was in middle school. I'm the 4th of 5 kids, and so 3 of my siblings were kind of off and on their way to college. And my grandparents were supposed to move into an apartment near us. My grandfather had one of his legs amputated, and my grandmother was his primary caregiver. And they were getting older. They were supposed to move up near us so that my mom could keep a better eye on them. And I think they lived in their apartment for about 3 months, maybe, before my mom realized that my grandmother had early onset Alzheimer's. And so they very quickly moved out of that apartment. We transformed our living room into a bedroom for my grandparents, and my mom cared for both of them. My grandmother succumbed to Alzheimer's, and then my grandfather later succumbed to cancer. And so seeing that from middle school into high school and college was just a really powerful experience to see what it was like for my parents and for our whole family to experience what caregiving looked like when your grandparents move into your home. And really, it was not part of my mom's plan at all, or our family's plan, to have them move into our living room. It was great to have them close by. They had previously lived hours away, so it was nice to get to spend that time with them, but it was also a really big challenge. So I'm very grateful that Kathy and Matt are here to talk about what we can do to help prep, because I know that I've started thinking about this really, really early on after having those personal experiences. So with that, I'll hand things over to Kathy to begin the presentation and share all of her wonderful advice. So thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Maura. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And I also would like to share some of my experiences with caregiving, because those experiences have certainly affected my life, and it informs the problem-solving approach I bring to clients when I help them with their financial plans. So in my family, my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's when he was young. He was in his early 50s, and my mom took care of him for over 20 years. So over the course of that time, I witnessed a huge range of life changes and supports that they needed until he passed away. And then we thought we were over the hump and into a nice quiet time in our life. And within only a few months of his death, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And so then I was thrust from supporting the caregiver to being one of the primary caregivers. And I, after a few months, quit my job and, pitched in with my sisters to help take care of my mom until she passed away. And so even though I'm past it with my own parents, I'm married, and my in-laws are, we're still lucky enough that my in-laws are still living, and they're 88, and they're living now in an assisted living facility. We spent all of last year helping them move into their new home, cleaning out their house, renovating the house, selling the house, getting them settled, and it's still front and center in our life. Even though they're getting the great care and the right care where they are, we still sort of lurch from medical crisis to medical crisis. So let me tell you a little bit about the presentation. Matt and I are advisors at Merrill Lynch, and Merrill Lynch and AgeWave collaborated on a research initiative to gain some greater understanding about different life stages and experiences and challenges people face during these times. So we define a life stage as a significant and a distinct period in your life that can last a long time. It's sufficiently potent to transform your identity. So for example, transitioning into parenthood. A life stage also represents someone's complex journey as they encounter and adapt to the changes in emotional, practical, and financial aspects of their life and the world around them. And by examining some of these key life stages, we reveal opportunities to help those seeking advice, guidance, and solutions tailored to their needs at significant junctures. So the bottom line is that, you know, the more we know about significant life stages, it helps us to provide better advice and planning for our clients. So in this seminar, we review some of the data we collected about the caregiving life stage. We'll look at some of the challenges and impacts on people's lives, and then talk about steps you can take to prepare. So I graduated from Holy Cross, as Maura mentioned, in 1988. And I know this topic, caregiving, is top of mind for me and my friends when we reconnect. One of the first questions we ask is, you know, how are your parents doing? How are you doing? How are you helping them? You know, what challenges are you facing? And even though that's true, I feel like we don't hear a lot about this in the media. I mean, you can go and find, there's plenty of books and blog posts and Facebook groups to help you with almost anything, whether it's parenting or how to take care of a pet or how to buy or renovate a house, but you don't hear a lot about folks in this stage of our lives. And so that's why when, you know, we paid attention to the seminars that Merrill Lynch was offering. And when Matt and I saw this caregiving seminar, we were quick to offer it to our clients. And I wanted to share it with my Holy Cross alums. So let's start some of the material. So we start the presentation with this great quote from First Lady Rosalind Carter. She founded the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving. And she said, there are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. When we talk about caregivers, they're traditionally referred to as informal caregivers, the 40 million folks who provide a variety of services and support for an adult family member or friend. They are not the paid professionals, such as a home health aide or nurse. The number of caregivers is only growing. Roughly 20 million people became caregivers in the last year alone, vastly outnumbering the roughly 3 million Americans who entered the life stage of parenting at the same time. And the caregiving landscape is expected to continue to change when we consider some of these major forces in our society. One is longevity. Life expectancy is projected to increase from an average life expectancy of 79 years to 84 years. Sociology has a big role to play here. The baby boomer generation is the largest generation, and those folks are now, many of those folks are today caregivers. Some of them are becoming folks who need some care. The generations behind them are smaller. So the supply of caregivers is projected to drop by nearly half in 2050. And some of these baby boomers are at risk of becoming elder orphans or not having someone in their family to help take care of them. And finally, technology. Technology is, as we see different advances, will definitely change the landscape of how we help take care of folks who need help. The vast majority of us will need some care in our lives. So in the research, when we asked folks over age 50, whether they believed they would need some care. Only 4 in 10 Americans over at age 50 believe they'll need some care in their lives. The reality is that 7 in 10 Americans who turning 65 will need care for prolonged periods in their lives. I think many of us just don't want to think about what the future might hold for us or what care we might need. And some of that makes some sense. If you think about your own grandparents, for example, like Maura was talking about, and you think about, well, how old were they when they died? Did they need care? Who provided it? I know in our family, some of my grandparents died suddenly and didn't really have a long decline. So if your own parents never had to take care of their parents who were living into their 80s and beyond, it stands to reason that they may now, your own parents may never have considered that they might need that kind of care themselves. Caregiving affects virtually all of us, and what caregivers are contributing is a lot. In 2019, caregivers of people with Alzheimer's provided over 18 billion hours of unpaid care. The contribution to the nation is valued at over $240 billion. So what do caregivers look like? So certainly their caregivers are of all ages. Family members provide more than 95% of non-professional care for older adults who don't live in nursing homes. And again, that when you reflect on that, that stands to reason as well. Because professional care can be prohibitively expensive, many families feel obliged or choose to step in and help. Caregiving is a life stage that women are more likely to encounter than men. And there are several reasons for this. One is just family tradition. In many families, it's expected that daughters are the ones who are going to provide the care. Longer life expectancy is another. A girl born in 2016 can expect to live an average of 81 years versus 76 years for a boy who was born in the same year. And on top of that, women have traditionally married men who are 2 or 3 years older. So for folks who are married, the husband is more likely to need care first, and so then the wife becomes the caregiver. So if 66% of caregivers are women, what they're investing really adds up. So when someone leaves the workforce or reduces hours to part-time to provide care, the lost wages really accumulate. So for a female, it's over $300,000 in lost wages and benefits for leaving the workforce. And for men, it's over $280,000. And the other thing our research noticed was that the combined effects of delayed childbearing and the longer life expectancy overall means that more adults might be sandwiched between the competing demands of raising their children and taking care of their aging parents and in-laws. 47% of middle-aged adults who we define as folks between age 40 and 59 are both raising children and caring for aging parents. One of the other things our research showed was the unique challenges for folks in the LGBT community. These folks are more likely to live alone and much less likely to have children who can help provide their care. Many fear inadequate treatment or discrimination and might delay seeking the help that they need. The recent CARE Act does require that hospitals ask patients at admission whether they would like to designate a caregiver and that they're required to record the caregiver's name and provide information to that person. So this can be beneficial for everybody, but certainly for folks in this community. So we look at financial caregiving as part of this journey. So across the course of taking care of someone in your family, caregivers' roles and responsibilities change. So we found that caregivers are providing so much more than just the hands-on physical care. Most startling, as we see here, more than 92% of caregivers are acting as financial caregivers for their care recipient. And at a high level, we can divide that up into sort of two categories. One is being a financial contributor. So that's somebody, if you're helping to pay the bills, you're helping to pay for home renovations, you're helping to pay for the professional caregiver coming in. And the other category of help is a financial coordinator. So that's someone, if you're helping organize the bill paying, you're helping to remember to take care of things. So you're not actually paying things out of your own pocket. Maybe you're taking on the bill paying, maybe you're helping file the taxes. There's a wide variety of specific tasks that folks are helping with. 65% of caregivers are paying bills from the care recipient's account. 47% are handling the insurance claims for the recipient, which can be extremely time consuming. And 53% are just helping monitor their care recipients' accounts as well. For folks who are financial contributors, 7 in 10 caregivers are contributing financially, and we're spending an average of about $7,000 on caregiving every year, and that goes towards paying for a wide range of needs such as prescriptions or home repair or paying for those professional caregivers. And what does that mean for the caregivers themselves? Well, when you're paying for that care, it can really have a huge impact on your own life. And when someone that you love really needs help, most of us just step forward to help, and we don't necessarily think about the impacts. We found in the research we did that 30% of caregivers had to cut back on their own expenses. 21% had dipped into their own savings. 15% took on debt to cover the cost of care. One of the common denominators we saw was that despite over all these challenges that financial caregivers were facing, many came back and said they just felt that they weren't prepared. Few had enough money set aside, and many really entered the role suddenly. 41% entered the role of being a caregiver suddenly. Very often it can be a big health crisis that shakes things up, and so you go from your loved one being fine and living on their own, driving, taking care of themselves, and then overnight you can find that the whole family is scrambling to try to figure out what you need. So we look across all of these challenges. Leaving a job or reducing your hours can have a significant impact on a caregiver's work trajectory, retirement timing, what your nest egg is. The cost of caregiving can cause ripple effects throughout the caregiver's life. And we're talking a lot about the financial impacts, but when we looked at the data, the highest percentage of caregivers, 68%, cited the mental and physical time and effort involved as the biggest challenge for being a caregiver. If you're living in this phase right now, I bet this roller coaster image looks familiar. Providing care can be terribly stressful, and the ups and downs definitely can feel like a roller coaster. Often you start out with a crisis, a health crisis, and suddenly you find yourself in a stranger in a strange land, trying to understand the medical side of things, and then trying to think through practical implications for your loved one. You know, can they come home? Can they be living at home? What kind of help do they need to be living at home safely? When will they recover? What does the future look like? And so that sort of leads you to this stress and this steep learning curve. And then you start to figure it out, and you might make some changes at work, and things sort of are on the upswing. And just sometimes when you feel like you have a handle on things, something else changes and you go right back into that stress and steep learning curve again. And you can kind of feel like you're sort of cycling through this high stress situation in the background of the rest of your life. And it just tends to go on until your loved one finally recovers and settles. And then eventually, over time until your loved one passes away. Some of the particular challenges you might face that a caregiver faces is the mental and physical time and effort involved, the complexities of navigating the healthcare system, adjusting to significant changes in their relationship with their loved one or other family members. Sometimes can be left feeling undervalued or isolated or more. One of the special challenges that stood out in the data was dealing with dementia. Coping with cognitive decline or Alzheimer's offers its own set of challenges and can be particularly stressful. Much of what we talk about with the costs and the stress are amplified in these situations. Unfortunately, it's hard to plan early, and a dementia diagnosis can feel like it comes out of the blue without a lot of warning, and the decline can be fast. So we all should be paying some attention for warning signs for Alzheimer's. And some of them are not what you might think. So I think we would all sort of be alert to memory loss and not remembering things, not remembering names of things. But some of the more sneaky symptoms of Alzheimer's might be someone who suddenly has poor judgment or makes a decision you don't understand, or starts withdrawing from work or social activities. Or they could have a personality or a mood change, and these can be early symptoms of Alzheimer's. The cost of cognitive decline is extensive. The cost of dementia care is so much greater than other types of care because the type of care is so specialized. Folks in late stages of the disease need 24-hour supervision, and it's not always possible to provide that care at home. So we've talked a lot. A lot of this data is spends a lot of time walking through the challenges that you face, the financial and personal challenges that you face. But I also wanted to note that not everything was so gloom and doom. Caregiving is also a journey that's marked by gratitude and honor and purpose. 65% of caregivers said that caregiving has brought meaning and purpose to their life. 91% said they were grateful to be providing care for someone that they love. And remarkably, even though that this is a tough role to fulfill, 77% said they would gladly take on the role of caregiver again. As Holy Cross graduates, we all strive to be men and women for others, and providing this kind of care for your loved one is second nature. It's something that we do without hesitation. Now that we've walked through some of the challenges this phase of your life can bring, I'd like to hand it off to Matt to discuss practical steps and things we can do to prepare and to try to minimize some of those negative impacts.
Thanks, Kathy. This is Matthew Pimental, and I'm a private wealth advisor and certified private wealth advisor and resident director at Merrill Lynch. But most importantly, I am the caregiver for my 73-year-old father. My journey as a caregiver is slightly different than Kathy's. And my father was a robust sportsman who on March 2nd, I was losing because he was cheating at cribbage, to 30 days later, he being in a wheelchair, unresponsive, and not able to care for himself and had to be committed to a facility. The onset and the speed of his decline was shocking and took me unprepared. And what I've realized through this journey is that the most important thing that we can do is care for our loved ones when they need it most. And what I've learned through my experience is, as a financial planner, I had a plan in place for my father, even though I didn't expect him to need it so early. And what I've realized is the best way that we can care for our loved ones is to have a plan in place before they need it. Now, when I look back at this, when I look back at my experience, when I look back at having my plan, I can point out serious deficiencies in my plan that I would like to relay to you. I'd like to relay what worked and what didn't work. So hopefully you can make decisions for yourselves or your loved ones that will ease the caregiving for you and for those that you're giving care to, and also point out the successes that I had. With that said, there's three general categories of building a plan. And I would actually add another one in here that I'll talk about, and that's implementation. And that's where I ran into the most trouble. So the three major categories are family decisions, legal documentation, I would say then it's implementation, and preparing for health costs. Family decisions is the most important step, and the first step that we need to talk about, and the first step of building a plan. If you're asking yourself, when is the correct time to plan? If you're listening to the seminar or you're thinking about this, then it is right now the time to prepare. And the first step is talking to your family. In this, for the next few slides, when I say I'm going to relate this as through my own experience, meaning that providing care for your parents. But if you're preparing for care for yourself, all the information is the same way. So talking with the family first, that's the most important thing. Speak early with your family and about what the care receivers and the caregivers, the parents and the children's expectations are. What that means is determine what the medical preferences of your parents are and the medical preferences of what you have as the caregiver are. What that means is look at what the medical directives, what do they want their end of life stages to be? What sort of medications do they want or want not to be on? Consider also where the location of where these services will be provided, where they want them to be provided, where it realistically can be provided. Is it in-home healthcare versus in a facility? Determine the location and what best suits your needs and the parents' needs, with the goal of providing with the best best care possible. Determine who should be the primary health care provider. Is it a person? Is it a facility? Is it a in-home health care provider that provides nursing staff to take care of your family? Think about that early. Then importantly, once you've discussed desires, location, who will be the primary help providing most of the healthcare, identify roles. And by roles, what I mean is back to Kathy's previous slides are who's going to be the healthcare proxy, who's going to be in charge of making healthcare decisions when your loved one can't make them, who's going to be in charge of the financial care, who's going to pay the loved one's bills. So identifying roles is an extremely important part of making family decisions, because that could, it could be location based. Someone that's far away still can pay the bills and relieve some of the stresses and time that it takes. Whereas someone that's closer to your parents, they may be more responsible for the healthcare proxy roles. So identify roles, and then importantly, make sure that everybody knows what you do in your roles, just in case someone else needs to step in. So have a backup plan if one person cannot successfully accomplish those goals. What I would suggest at this point also is have a really good grasp of what bills are being paid by your parents. The best way to do that is to gather up mail consistently over a period of 3 or 4 months beforehand and have a list developed of what bills need to be paid, including insurance. Then what I'd say is once you've identified the desires of your parents and the children, the location of where the care is best to be provided, who will provide that, who will be the healthcare provider, and then have identified roles. You really got to look at those roles and identify and talk about it and be honest with yourself about how much time it's going to take for you to do this. For example, if you're in charge of the paying all the bills, making sure the taxes are paid, making sure the Medicare Part D co-pays are paid, look at your life, look at your work schedule, and realize that it's probably going to take you 5 or 6 hours a week in order to maintain this. And be honest with yourself. With that said, it's a stressful, there are stresses that go along with that. You know, managing your time and managing helping other times, even though even though you want to do it and you love doing it, you have to understand that, you know, if 5 hours out of your week are cut out by doing this, you've got to understand that's 5 hours that you're going to not be spending with your family or at work. And so develop a plan to monitor and maintain how you feel as a person as well, to make sure that your mental and your physical health stays on par where you want. So family decisions are the first step. And really it comes from talking to your family, developing roles, and being realistic with yourself about the time those roles will take. The second step I would say would be legal documentation. And this is what I had personally developed, and I thought that I had my plan completely buttoned up. I'm a financial planner at Merrill Lynch, and I got the documentation drawn up, and I was ready to take care of my father. And then over 30 days, I had to implement all of that legal documentation, and I am shocked at how long it took in order to implement what I had planned. So legal documentation, what is legal documentation, and what we recommend that you have drawn up for your parents or for yourself. The first thing I would say is arrange for a power of attorney. What a power of attorney does, it allows someone else to act as if they were you on financial matters. A power of attorney can be drawn up so people can pay your bills, they can write checks for you, they can access your bank accounts, your investment accounts, your IRAs. They can speak for you and act for you for your finances. They can also act for you in legal matters as well. So a power of attorney is a document that is drawn up. The next step I'd say is you would definitely develop a healthcare proxy. A healthcare proxy designates someone else who can make healthcare decisions for you. What sort of drugs you can take, what sort of drugs can be reduced, if there are any drug changes, your healthcare proxy can make decisions for you. What sort of care is provided also. End of life planning, now that's a will. You would want to have a will drawn up for yourself or for your loved ones or for your parents. The fourth one that's not on here, and based on the discussion with your estate planning attorney or your elder care law attorney or your financial planner, you may want to consider a revocable trust. A revocable trust is like a power of attorney, only it is stronger and longer lasting. So if your discussions with an estate planning attorney or an elder care law provider attorney, you would want to bring that up and see if that's appropriate, or of course with your financial advisor to determine that. So, having these drawn up, once you determine roles, who's going to pay the bills, that person would most likely be the power of attorney. What I found through my experience is I had all these drawn up, and I was the healthcare proxy, the power of attorney, and the executor of the will for my father. And what I found out is that is too much to handle all by myself, and I needed help. And after the fact, I needed to go to the family and express, I need help with this. I need help caring for dad. And they're loving family that they are, they've provided that help. What I found out about is having this lovely plan drawn up and how the documentation in place was, the problem was with implementation. What I mean by that is if I had the power of attorney drawn up, however, my father's bank accounts and banks did not know that I was the power of attorney. So when I needed to log on and I needed to pay my father's bills, I wasn't able to do that. I had to go provide the institutions with the power of attorney. Then that goes through their review process, and then they will provide you with documentation that you need filled out, and then it goes through another review process. And what I found was sometimes it was 8 weeks before I was actually able to write a check for my father, or I was able to log on and set up automatic payment for his taxes and for the water bill. So implementation, once you have a power of attorney drawn up for someone, implement that early. Go to the institutions, find out what their process is, start early. Power of attorney, for example, also, my father's Medicare Part D supplemental policy, being able to contact them over the phone, getting login information. As a power of attorney, you can access those accounts, but you just have to go through their process. And quite often that's, again, 2 or 3 weeks. Implementation was the biggest stress provider for me. And so once you have the documents drawn up, I can't stress this enough, have those documents implemented for yourself. As well as on this legal documentation, I'd reiterate the most important thing that I did was also gather up my father's bills and consolidate them. Other thing that's overlooked on this legal documentation, and then we'll move on, is post office. Go to the post office and be prepared to have those bills forwarded to your address if you're taking care of them. All these same sort of implementations are the same exact thing with a healthcare proxy. Talk to the healthcare providers and let them know who the healthcare proxy is. So then if there's an immediate need, which there was in my case, to make medical decisions, they could make those decisions and talk to me right away. Have a healthcare proxy implemented. So the legal documentation and implementation is part of a plan, an important part of the plan that you need to develop and implement. The third, or let's say fourth phase, would be planning for healthcare costs. And if you're planning for someone else or you're planning for yourself, the most important thing is a certain number of years are going to cost a certain number of dollars to care for yourself in a facility or to have a home healthcare person provide it for you. And that number, what the simplest thing to do is develop a net worth statement for yourself, and also where incomes derive for yourself. That's in a succinct document that you can pass off to someone who's going to provide healthcare for yourself, or create that net income and income statement for your parents early and often. If you know how much income's coming in, and if you know how much assets are that they have, you'll be able to determine how long those assets are going to last. And at the end of the lifetime of those assets, it'll give you a buffer time where you can then make contingency planning to go on Medicaid or potentially Mass Health if you're a Massachusetts resident. So having a net worth statement and an income statement developed for yourself or for your parents is extremely important. I did not have that for my father, and it had caused me a lot of work and stress developing that later on as we're transitioning to get him into a facility that the state is partially paying for. Once you have a net worth statement, you can look at, all right, well, how maybe we could help pay for long-term care in a facility, or home health care in a facility. And some of those things that you can look at if you're planning for yourself, or if you're planning for your parents and you have time, will be take a look at long-term care insurance. Maybe it's a fit for you. Maybe it's a fit for your parents. Maybe you want to establish a home equity line of credit You want to take a look at healthcare savings accounts for yourself or for your parents, maybe funding them along your life, all along your savings patterns in order to have a separate account that's set up for yourself. So planning is extremely important for yourself for healthcare, and it's also extremely important, the financial planning piece of it, for your parents. If you need help with that, please feel free to reach out to Kathy or I to, we can assist, or we can direct you to someone who can help. So to summarize, looking back on my experience, I had a plan in place, but I was woefully unprepared for the implementation of that plan. It's extremely important to openly and honestly talk with your family members about providing healthcare for your parents or for yourself. Open and honest. Discuss it. Discuss your desires. Discuss who's best suited to provide certain caregiving roles. Make those family decisions. After those the family decisions have been made, get legal documentation drawn up. Legal documentation, you'll need to see an estate planning attorney or an elder care law attorney to draw those up. I would recommend that you focus and use specifically someone who has experience with the estate planning and elder care law to draw those up. Implement those. And then the planning for healthcare costs is what I would say is something that you need to do, and you can do that as early as possible. Develop a net worth statement, determine how long your assets will take care of you, and then if there are certain things that you can do now, do them now. And that also includes maybe potentially planning on getting assets out of your estate or your parents' estate if it's appropriate at that time. But that said, I hope that my part has been helpful, and I hope I've been able to pass off some things that you can use. And with that, I'll pass it back to Kathy.
Great, thanks, Matt. So we wanted to follow up. We were going to open up for some questions. We do have some resources we can pass on to you. I think, after I looked through everything, we have something called a conversation guide, and I've provided that to Maura to send to everyone who was able to join us today. I think that's a great place to start because talking with your family is really the first step to be well positioned on this phase of your life. Maura, do we have any questions we needed to address?
Yes, wonderful. And thank you all. I'm just going to flip us over so that people can see us. So I'll move us over to gallery view. And I do have a number of questions to ask. First, I just want to say thank you both so much for sharing not just your advice and wisdom, but your experiences, because as I mentioned before, we've all seen this from many different angles, and I'm sure there are many more experiences that we can share from family and friends who have gone through even different things. And so I find it very helpful to learn from others who are going through this. So thank you very much. This question makes me think of those old, I think they're all the old like 401k commercials of, people lining up on the ground to figure out how much do you think you're going to need for retirement and everything. But, with this, how would you estimate the amount of money that you should save in order, not just for yourself, but thinking, okay, I want to be prepared to contribute to my family. That's probably an impossible question to ask and to answer, but is there a certain ballpark or some tools that people can use to help them think about maybe what they might need to set aside?
It is an impossible question. There isn't, so just like there's not, I have had people ask me too, how much do I have to have saved to make sure I have enough money in retirement? and it's just like, well, it depends how much you're living on, and how much you need to live day to day. And the thing with how much you need for care, it's, well, you don't know how much care you're going to need, right? So you could be one of those lucky few who's, you know, living at home and you're 95 and you're driving and you're one of those folks that don't need any care, you know, and you die in your sleep when you're 95, right? Or you could be someone who's like my parents who were dealing with some health challenges quite young, and spending money young. So there isn't a way to know, and it's very personal. It's very much integrated in also what your whole financial picture looks like, right? So we look at, and this is where, you know, when you look at that, you do that net worth statement, you know, Matt was talking about for your parents, but when you're thinking about it, even for yourself, it's complex, because you're looking at, well, you know, do you have a partner? So if you do, well, then when you're thinking about how much money you need to spend on care, you have to look at, well, I need to have money left to take care of the survivor, right? So if one of you is first to get sick or need help, you can't spend down all the assets. There won't be anything left to take care of the survivor. When we talk about those honest conversations with family, some people feel very strongly that they have legacy plans. They want to be able to leave, you know, money for grandchildren's education. They want to leave money for charitable contributions, and that's really important to them. Other folks, it's like spend it all. It's, you know, that's what it's for. We're just spending it all. So it's, unfortunately, there isn't a hard and fast rule. So having said that, to say there's not a hard and fast rule, if you've never done this before, when you hear people say that it's really expensive, you may have heard the term, if you're in a nursing home, that's $500 a day. Nursing home is that's in Massachusetts. A nursing home is really for someone who really needs nursing care, and typically towards the end of their life, or they have a very significant medical problem. Assisted living is more that you live in, you get 3 meals a day, you get on-call help with home health aides and that sort of thing. That's about half the cost of a nursing home. So you would factor, you know, $200, $250 a day, depending on the place, depending on the home, depending on the amount of care they offer, how nice it is. But again, these are in Massachusetts, where we're kind of high end. And then the third sort of idea for you to kind of calculate in your head or try to picture is if you have to pay for care to come in the house with a home health aide, that's typically where you start, right? So someone's pretty well able to manage, but they have a health crisis, and now they get to a point where, well, they just really need someone to come in and spot them, to get in and out of the shower in the morning, get dressed, maybe make sure lunch is made, put on a wash, make their make sure they've had their breakfast, remind them to take pills, that kind of thing. So if you hire a professional, home health aide from an agency that's licensed and has insurance and all that, it's about, in Massachusetts, about $30 an hour. And if you're working through an agency, they usually have a minimum shift. So if someone's coming to your home, they're not going to send them for just an hour. It's usually about, I think the minimum that we found was about 3 hours. And then they really would like to come for 4. So if you're sending them for 3, they put it like a $10 surcharge. So back of the envelope, it's about $100 for home health aide to come to your house. And so you could sort of gauge that. It can be well worth the money, because that could really extend how long you're living independently. There are people that could do that for a really long time. And when you're working it out with your family, it might be, well, maybe someone who's living close by can help out. And if we have the home health aide come in the morning while I'm at work, I can come home after supper at night and make sure mom's had dinner and everything, and she's in good shape to go to bed. But I can do that. We don't have to pay somebody to come and do that. So you can be kind of creative with the cost.
That's helpful. Thank you. I think even just to have some general buckets of kind of dollars to think about, knowing that Massachusetts tends to be more expensive. So that's helpful. Here's a question that came up. It's a little bit specific, so I'll broaden it a little bit. Someone who said their mother recently drew up a will and plan and has designated this person as power of attorney. So they've got that started. And her plan for long-term care is to sell the house to pay and use that revenue to pay for the healthcare costs. have you talked to people who have had that kind of a plan in place, and do you have any advice on looking at real estate revenue as a tool for paying for healthcare costs and end of life costs?
Yes, that's a very common way to look at it, and that's one of the most common ways that we see that with folks, is that their house becomes the resource that's going to pay for long-term care for themselves and for care for themselves. And whether it's selling the house and turning that into a liquid asset that gets drawn down, or if they turn it into an income stream, whether it's taking a mortgage or reverse mortgage or an annuity on the assets as well. You got to remember, with your house, the way that you've got to look at your house at that point is just like you would look at it as an investment, a stock, a bond, a bank account, and that's the way that the facility will look at it too. So having a house and no money, what they'll do is they're going to put a lien on that house. So that is the most common way. Is there a plus or a minus to that? Really just kind of think about it as your goal as an asset. And once you think of it as not as a house, but actually as an asset, or even break it down a little further, it's not an asset, tie a value to it. This house is worth $250,000. It's the same exact thing as having a bank account with $250,000. I hope that helps more. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you. Because I think especially sometimes the real estate market is great, sometimes it's not. So it's helpful to kind of think about it and the pros and cons of using that as an asset. That's great. Another question that came up has to do with long-term care insurance, because I know that was something that at a time was a good thing to get and easy to get. And I know I've heard over the years that it's become more challenging and more expensive to get long-term care insurance. Do you have any insight, I guess, into the state of things right now, kind of advice for someone who might be thinking about long-term care insurance as a good option? Kind of how easy it is to get, or if it is worth the investment?
Sure. Yes. On the fact that, yes, it's expensive. Yes, it can be hard to get. The long-term care insurance market's changed a lot since those early policies came out. So policies have evolved. And so there's sort of two types of products that we see most often. One is a straightforward long-term care insurance policy, and that's designed to provide sort of the most long-term care benefit every month for usually a term of like 5 or 6 years. Those policies, when you are investigating those policies, you pretty much start with that monthly benefit. How much of a monthly benefit am I going to try to buy? So you look at some of those ballpark numbers we just talked about and said, well, I know it's expensive, but gosh, if I had a policy that would pay $3,000 a month, that would help. That would help sort of provide sort of a baseline. And so you would back into that, from that monthly benefit back up into what the cost would be. Those policies are great for providing sort of the most monthly benefit you can get. If you were to purchase them and then never need it, there is a death benefit, but it's small. It's usually even less than what you paid for the policy. So that's sort of a risk there. They're hard to get in that they're really looking to insure people who are healthy. So if you already have a disease process going on, or anything that might make it look like you're really going to need care, then you might not get approved to be covered under a long-term care policy like that. And some of the carriers will even publish a list of medications and say, if you're taking one of these medications, then we're probably not going to approve you. But so sometimes with clients, it's, usually when you're in, your 50s or 60s, if you're healthy, then it's certainly something to think about. The other type of category of long-term care insurance is really a life insurance product, where you sort of buy what we would all consider a normal life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. And so in that case, you'd say, I'm going to buy a $500,000 life insurance policy. And the long-term care rider gives you the option to draw down that death benefit early if you qualify for long-term care coverage. But the period it'll pay out over would be about 24 months, so 2 years, a shorter term. Some clients like that because it's a little bit easier to get qualified for, and it's a little easier, frankly, to just wrap your head around. I'm buying $500,000 worth of insurance, and either my estate's going to get it if I pass away and never need it, or I'm going to be able to draw it down ahead of time to pay for long-term care. And if I draw down part of it and then pass away, then my estate gets the remainder. So it's sort of easy to understand. And so folks like that, they like that part of it. I mean, you do get more insurance really with the other policy because the other policy can be indexed for inflation and all these things. But there's a lot to weigh. Bottom line, they're expensive, but they can be very valuable. And if you're healthy and you're thinking about it, it's definitely worth exploring. When I tell people when you're in your 50s or early 60s, like, really already? I said, yes, because that's when it's not nearly as terribly as expensive, or it's prohibitive once you get past those ages. So I don't think any of us wants to think we're quite ready to start thinking about that yet, but.
No, but it is helpful to have that information just to be prepared, and I was thinking about, we're reaching the hour mark. And so if there is kind of one final piece of advice that you'd give to help people feel prepared and to help people get started, I guess, Matt, I'll start with you. What would be your parting nugget of advice to share?
Start talking about it with your family often. And if you need to bring me as an example, say you heard someone whose father was 73, and in a 30-day period, they went from being a vibrant person, driving and fishing, and again, cheating at cribbage, to someone who was wheelchair bound and needed everything taken care of for them. And what you as a person, you want to be prepared to help your loved ones. Yeah. And I think that's where it comes from. It comes from a place of love. If you can, it was one thing that I would recommend for.
Thank you. And Kathy, what parting advice would you share?
The conversation is so key, and planning. You really, as much as you can, you want to plan, because what we're trying to do is make sure that someone has the best quality of life for their whole life. So this is about making sure that everyone's taken care of, and not having the conversation because you just can't bring yourself to think about it doesn't do anybody any good. You really, the more you can plan and talk about it, the better outcome you'll have for your whole family.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I do have that conversation guide, which I'll email to everyone on this call. So thank you for providing that, Kathy, because I know it's not the type of conversation most people want to be having when they see their loved ones, particularly these days. But I believe you in terms of how important it is. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, this has been recorded, and I'll share the whole recording with you so that you can go back and look through all this great advice. And I took lots of notes, but I know there are gaps that I'll need to fill in. If you have any questions, you can contact me here in the alumni office. I'm at msweeney@holycross.edu. And I'm thrilled to have you join us today. I'm delighted to have had you with us, Kathy and Matt. This has been a really, really tremendous use of the hour. So thank you for giving your time and sharing your stories with all of us. And I hope that all of you will join us again for another Holy Cross event. We've got a lot of virtual events coming up of all types and all subjects. So we hope to see you then. There'll be a short survey that pops up at the end of the call. So please give us your advice. And with that, I hope that you all have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Kathy. Thank you, Matt.
Great. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.